Hi, this is my review of Beneath the Med, published by GMT Games, and it's the fourth in the Hunters series. I've just finished playing through a campaign in this, so I thought I'd do a quick review. So first up, the rulebook. The rulebook's very well written. This is the fourth game in the series, as I mentioned. You don't need to have played any of the previous games to be able to play this one. It's completely standalone. If you have played them, and I have played all the others, this will be very familiar to you. There are some changes or some additions in this game, which I'll mention later. But yeah, the rulebook it happily takes its time in explaining the game to you. I can remember the first time I played one of these games in the series, and I think I spent an evening just reading through the rules and then set the game up and was pretty much straight into the game. It's very straightforward, mainly because it's very well written, and it takes you through step by step everything that you need to know. What I would say with this game as well, which is great, is that once you've been playing for like 10-15 minutes, you only really occasionally have to refer back to the rulebook. So next up, this is your submarine sheet that you'll be mostly using through the game. This is probably one of the key components of the game. There are numerous submarines that you can choose between. This is a cavalry class, and I started the game with this in June 1940. It's very well laid out. You have your torpedoes that you've armed. You have this is your sub here. And depending on the patrol that you roll, and I'll show you that in a second, you then use one of these charts here to chart your progression through. It's very straightforward. You also have some other counters for hull damage and flooding, status of your crew, your components of your sub that can take damage, and believe you me, they will get marked up on here. It's nicely laid out, as I said, yeah, and all the counters are great, quite hard wearing. I've played some of the other games in this series umpteen times, and the game still looks great, and all the components hold up really, really well. So this is your patrol assignment. Basically, when you've chosen your submarine, depending on the year, you roll on this chart to see what patrol you're going to be doing. Again, very nicely laid out. You have the encounters for the aircraft here as well, which again you'll be using as you get attacked by different aircraft in the game. There's a different patrol assignment depending on if you start in where you start. So this one is for the Med, and this one is for if you start with the Better Somme, which is interesting. I've played through the campaign a couple of times now, starting in both those two locations. It basically, so for example, here in June 1940, you probably will be, I mean, 2d6, average is 7, so Spanish coast, that'll be your first patrol, whereas in the Med, for example, 7 is Central Med. So there's differences between those two charts, which adds again to the longevity of the game and replayability of the game. Then this chart is your encounter chart. Basically, you roll on here to determine what happens in each of the different zones, I'll call them. So for example, if you're doing on your submarine chart over here, you're doing the Western Med, so you rolled that on the previous table. Then the first two zones are transit zones, so you may encounter aircraft, which I invariably do. And then you actually into the Western Med for a handful of different zones, and then you roll on the Western Med chart to see what happens in there. You can encounter capital ships, which are the kind of key ships that if you sink them, you get all kind of medals, which is great. Escorts and ships, which are a combination of an escort and a sort of a nice juicy target that you'll be very tempted to attack. The warships, same with convoys, are basically like ship and escorts but multiple ships, and then again the aircraft. So fundamentally you're going to be rolling on this chart every zone, and every game has roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so about 10 different zones that you're going to be rolling through for a patrol, for example. Again, it's very nicely laid out, very clear, and you're going to be using this play rate a lot. On the reverse side of this, which is handy because basically these two sides are the sides you'll probably be using the most, is you have your combat tables for when you're trying to torpedo a target ship. There are different distances that you can choose between, and then you roll depending on what the distance is and some modifiers. Again, very nicely laid out. It's very clear. It's a game that methodically takes you through this, this chart, and then the next chart, and the next chart. Very, very clear when you're playing the progression through the charts that you go through. Here's an example of some of the targets. So when you've determined what your target is, so for example, maybe a small freighter, you're rolling a D100 to determine which freighter it is. All the ships have a different tonnage. Basically, the higher the tonnage, the more sinking it's going to take, but the higher the reward, as the game is all about recording the most amount of tonnage that you can during your campaign. Your campaign finishes either by the date or by, unfortunately, you losing your commander and your crew. Again, very, very straightforward. What I would say, which I do like about this game a lot, is there's lots of ships. So this is a D100 for the small freighters, is 100 ships. Occasionally you may sink a ship and then re-encounter it later. I simply re-roll the dice, to be fair. Then on the flip side of this chart, you have all the damage detail of when you take hits. So in the game, once you've, depending on what you encounter, aircraft or enemy ships, you will roll to determine if they detect you. If they detect you, you'll be rolling on charts and damage charts to see what damage they can do. I have been sunk in two ways. One way is over time during a patrol, and the second way is I got sunk recently by an air attack that just happened to roll the correct dice, or incorrect dice for me, on the air attack chart. And again, it's very clear. The game does a really good job of just taking you through which chart follows which chart, and there aren't many. There really aren't. And once you've played through halfway through a patrol, so your first 15-20 minutes of the game, you'll understand the flow of which chart to refer to next. So other fun stuff in the game that's a bit more unique to this particular game. You have the SLCs, which are basically like that's what it's called, frogmen on what looks like a torpedo. There are rules for those and missions that you can do for those, which is a lot of fun. And there's a medal that you can try and earn specific to those from memory. There are some optional rules, such as evasive manoeuvres. There's this brilliant random events. You have to roll a 2d6 to encounter one of these on one of the previous charts. And funnily enough, nearly every single patrol I seem to come across one of these random events, which is brilliant. And they add a lot of bit of flavour to the game. Which is great. Just adds to that sort of narrative experience of the game. The other sheet I was going to mention is the Commandant and Crew Status sheet. The Commandant, which is basically the commander of your sub. As you earn medals, you place the medal on the sheet here. And originally, I was like, I don't think I'm going to do that. And then I earned a medal, and I thought, oh, you know what, I will. And then I earned another medal, and I pinned that as well. And then before you know it, you become quite addicted to try and get the medals to pin them on the sheet, which is brilliant. Unfortunately, though, if your commandant dies, you have to remove them. So yeah, it's one of those parts of the game. And there's another one. There's a map as well that you can use optionally. You don't need to use them, but they add. Interestingly, they help you become more attached to the crew, and part of this game. That's really what the game's about. It's as much about the crew as it is about the actual submarine, I would say. Here are some of the other submarines that you get in the game that you can choose to command, and there's tons. You get loads of them, all different classes. I'll be honest with you, my knowledge of the Italian Royal Navy is a little bit lacking compared to, say, for example, U-boats or the Atlantic or the Pacific, but I find it fascinating. One of the great things about this game is that if you take a little bit of time just to do a little bit of research. It opens up so much more knowledge to you, which is wonderful, absolutely brilliant. But you get tons of these. So there are, again, the replayability. And let's pick this class here, for example. This one only has 3 patrol types, and they're shorter. So you've got the Western Med, Central Med, or Eastern Med. It's available in June 1940 as well. It can't take so much flooding damage before it has to surface. I don't think it can't take quite as much hull damage as well before it's sunk. So there's nuances to each different type of submarine. Like I said, it adds to the replayability, adds to the historical flavour of the game. And when you go through the rulebook and some of the designer notes at the end, you can see that Gregory M. Smith certainly has done his homework when it comes to the historical content of the game, which is absolutely great. This chart here, this is your attack map. Again, you're going to use this all the time. So normally I have this laid out next to my submarine chart here. This basically tells you when you've rolled on the tables as to what targets are in your zones. You put these, depending on what they are, on this chart here, depending on how much tonnage they have as to how much damage they can take. And then you determine how many torpedoes will, let's say, fire 1 torpedo against, that's an escort, sorry. You've got a small freighter here. Let's say I try and torpedo that small freighter. There I determine the range that I'm going to torpedo from, so medium range, for example, whether it's day or night, whether I'm submerged or on the surface. All those things have an impact on the charts that you're going to be rolling on. There's quite a sort of sticky mechanic I'll describe of determining how many torpedoes you want to fire against each target you have. Invariably, the torpedoes may well miss. It's very rare there are duds actually in this game, which again is sort of historical, but they are generally, the targets are harder to hit, which I think, again, looking at the designer notes, is reflective of the submarines that we used in this part of the war. So you're not going to be getting the tonnage that you would be scoring in some of the other games in this series, which again is quite interesting and quite historical. Gives that sort of historical flavour, which I really enjoy. So what do I like about the game? I think it could be summarised in this sheet, actually, more than anything. What this game does is create for you a very rich narrative experience as you're moving your sub through the different zones on your patrol, encountering different obstacles, different targets, having decisions to make. How many torpedoes? Do I even engage in the first place? How many torpedoes? There's a risk reward for just trying to work out or trying to decide the range you want to engage the targets, depending on the target, if the target has an escort. And there's that creates a very rich tapestry of a story on your patrol. Use this log, you don't have to record the events that happen on the log, I'll say. It's predominantly aimed at recording the tonnage that you score, so when you sink or you encounter a target. I have also played games in this series where I've not used the patrol log. Instead, I've created like a diary of what happens in each zone from some of the random events, or whether I fired the torpedoes and they got a dud, or they missed, or whether I tried to follow a target and I lost sight of the target. And all those charts will do is create that narrative for you, and then you record that narrative in any which way you want to. And as you're playing the game, it is a game that has that, I would almost call it a role play feeling to it, that you're imagining the crew, you're imagining what's happening in the action in your mind that comes to life by rolling on the charts. And the game does that brilliantly. The naval battles of World War II are of great interest to me, in particular predominantly U-boats in the Atlantic, if I'm being honest. So I've always enjoyed the hunters and the hunted. which are two of the other games in the series. What this one did was sort of show to me that there's another part of this period of history that I was less familiar with, and doing some research, watching a couple of videos on YouTube, etc., reading some articles, kind of helped bring that to life, and that's what I enjoy about the game. It is a game that requires as much from you as you require from the game, and by that I mean, if you want to take it at its base mechanics, you're rolling on charts and recording things, right? But if you can, while you're doing that, play out the events in your mind's eye, imagine the frustration and adulation and apprehension, I think, and even through to how the dread that the crew would be feeling, that's when it comes to life. And the game will let you do that if you allow or find enjoyment in imagining that for yourself. And that's what I enjoy about the game. The components are great. The rulebook's great. Value for money, if you enjoy this game, is off the charts, because I've played these types of solitaire narrative games over and over and over, night after night after night, happily, and never grown tired of them. But in that, this is not a game because it's solitaire, because of the nature of the game. There are some rules in there about playing it, competitively at tournaments and things like that. I've never done that. For me, the primary aim of this game is to create that story, and sometimes the story ends in tragedy, as it did in history, right? So, and for that, I absolutely love this series of games, and this one's a great addition. There are some nuances that I haven't talked about, so I'll let you discover those for yourself as to what makes this game a bit different. I would say, having played all the games in the series, and it could be because this is the one I've just played the most recent, this is actually in many ways my favourite one, because I think it was a new piece of history to me. So that was interesting, and I would say from memory, it feels like there's a little bit more choice making, decision making, and there's a little bit more variety in this game, maybe compared to the other ones in the series. Saying that, of course, if you just want to play, U-boats in the Atlantic, then get that game that does that. But yeah, I really enjoy this series of games. Never grow tired of them. This is a great addition. Like I said, top-notch quality components. The rulebook is great. All the little nuances on the rules specific to this, I thoroughly enjoyed. And as I said, I never ever grow tired of playing these kind of narrative war games. So yeah, thanks for watching.